Welcome to HurricaneCenterLive.com. I'm Alex Garcia, Director of the National Tropical Weather Conference and Executive Producer of these programs. These programs are made possible by USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, and Plylocks Hurricane Clips. These programs are also a team effort with Bill Reed, the former Director of the National Hurricane Center, and Tim Smith, Chief Meteorologist of KRGV-TV. And now, here's Tim Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Live, the special report today to talk about Hurricane Delta in the Gulf of Mexico, ABCD, the fourth storm, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, in the Greek alphabet, which is way beyond where we typically go during a hurricane season. Bill Reed's going to give us an update on that in just a second. But once again, we want to thank all of our sponsors who make this a possibility, as always. The South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau. South Padre Island is the host of the National Tropical Weather Conference and kind of hosting it virtually this time around after meeting many, many times there on South Padre. And we hope to be back in April of 2021. Also, thanks to USAA for their sponsorship of this event and many of the events we do through the Storm Science Network. We appreciate USAA and their continued support. Also, thanks to Plylocks, the guys that make these little tiny hurricane clips, or these little clips that clip onto your plywood, slide it into the window. In fact, we've got a little message from Plylocks just to give you some information. If you need these, I'll show you how easy they are to use. Here's Plylocks.
Plylocks window clips are patented 8-shaped carbon or stainless steel clips engineered to fit 1/2, 5/8, or 3/4 inch plywood without nails, screws, or adhesives. Designed to fit in the 2.5-inch window inset of your brick, wood, or stucco home. They are installed in seconds, and they are an inexpensive, non-destructive way to protect your windows from high winds and airborne debris. To install, first measure each window casing and subtract 1/4 inch off the length and width measurement, leaving a 1/8 inch clearance all the way around. Next, cut your plywood to the recorded measurements. Make sure the clips fit snugly on the plywood. If needed, squeeze the Plylocks clips with your fingers for a tighter fit. If the window is 24 inches by 24 inches or smaller, only 2 Plylocks clips are needed on each vertical side. Excluded from this rule are circular, arched, or octagonal windows. Each clip should be placed on the plywood cover no more than 24 inches apart. Make sure the tension legs are facing towards you. Push the plywood covers with the Plylocks tension legs to the outside firmly into the casing. For larger windows or sliding glass doors, seam the plywood if needed and use additional Plylocks clips spaced no more than 24 inches apart. For more direction on larger window installation, please visit our website. To remove, just release tension from behind the clip by putting your finger behind the tension leg and pulling towards you. Work the Plylocks clips on one side of the plywood sheet. Remove the Plylocks clips from the plywood and store in a dry place. Lock in protection with Plylocks.
Thank you to Plylocks and all the great sponsors who make NTWC Live a possibility. We've been doing this since March. Once we realized we couldn't meet in person, we had to find another way. So here we are, and those sponsors making it possible. Bill Reed's with us now, former director of the National Hurricane Center. Bill, yesterday, Barry Goldsmith joined us for a little while, and Barry with the National Weather Service in Brownsville, talking about how they had taken over for a long time for the office in Lake Charles as the backup office. And he's concerned they may have to do that again as this next storm, Delta, makes its way toward the northern Gulf Coast. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Tim, and everybody. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Lake Charles area towards the end of this little show. I'm going to give you on the current status of Delta and a little bit on the forecast. Remember, we had a very similar scenario developing for Laura, but there's actually a lot of differences in there. There was a lot of uncertainty, even at this close range on Laura, not so much on that. So let's see if I can show you what I want to show you here. Okay. This is a water vapor loop of the last couple of hours over the Gulf of Mexico and adjacent southern portion of the United States. First off, the first thing we all can see on there very quickly is we're finally getting a little clearing out of the cloud mass over the center of the storm, and an eye probably is developing at this time in Laura. It is still moving towards a little more northwest than west-northwest now, so it's starting to feel the change in steering currents. It's grown bigger, at least the cloud mass has. The circulation The Gulf's been pretty much cyclonic at the surface between the cold front, Gamma, and now Delta. And it's hard to determine where the storm ends and the synoptic pattern surrounding it begins. And we're starting to see some growth, though, in the extent of the tropical storm force winds, and that'll continue probably to pretty close to landfall, looking at the current forecast scenario. The next feature of interest on this picture, it's a water vapor loop, and it helps depict these areas where there's not cloud cover of changes in the flow. Big ridge of high pressure given the heat and dry over the west. There's a weak trough that's centered over the southern plains here. In fact, a little circulation vorticity center up here in western Oklahoma, and that trough lingers back into the northern Mexico area. And you can see the motion is from the south-southwest to north-northeast across northeast Mexico into Texas. And as the thinking is by the models and the humans is as Delta gets for a little further west later today and into the night, it'll start feeling the change in the flow pattern around this ridge. It starts over in Florida and extends. You can't see it under the cloud cover. There's a mid-level ridge there, but instead of the southwest to north or southeast to northwest steering flow, we're going to have a more south to north steering flow, and that'll persist well beyond landfall into Louisiana. Okay, let's see what we got next here. My icon's got in the way here. It's the recon from right now, the NOAA plane that's out in the storm there, and you can see there the little whitish pink barbs there over 100 knots. So we're still seeing an increase in the intensity in the eye wall region of the storm, and the extent out at flight level of hurricane force and 50-knot winds has also increased since the flights of yesterday in there. And we live and die by these recon planes. It is so good to have the very detailed data that they get in there. Some of the models now ingest a lot of it, including the HWRF, and even getting into some aspects of the global models from the data that's collected there. The other aspect, I don't have the image for it right now. Maybe I can get to it. Let's see if I can pull this off here. Okay. The other factor between the shear that's going to be incurred, I'll show you that in a minute here. Whoops, I wanted to do something here. We go. Western Atlantic is because of the cold front and the various storms we've had, the Gulf water temperatures are actually below normal now, though they're still warm enough, obviously, to support cyclone development. They're less than what you would normally see this time of year. And the storm's exiting this region here, and it'll be crossing area with marginal temperatures when it reaches the continental shelf. And the combination of that and the wind shear that's anticipated is hopefully going to weaken it some, maybe a lot, right before landfall. We'll wait and see. It's a tougher one to crack. Okay, from the model perspective, here we are at 12Z, and our trough here is depicted as 500 millibars, just to give you a rough estimate of the steering flow there. And the storm's still in this northwest steering current that you can see some of the wind arrows out in here that indicate that. But by tomorrow morning, that steering current is robust in the south-southwest to north-northeast or north direction, taking it on into Louisiana. And that trough has been well forecast all along. I'd hazard a bet 15, 20 years ago, we would have a much less confident forecast coming out of the models, and therefore us humans, and probably would have had to evacuate portions of the Texas coast more rigorously than we're going to with Delta. The other factor that's affecting the intensity of the storm is going to be the wind shear. They'll just follow a couple of time steps as it approaches the coast. The reds indicate a very strong wind shear all over the northern semicircle of the storm. So it should start getting a weakening trend due to the shear and some dry air that it'll be entrained into it at that time. One other thing, pull up here. That was interesting. Okay, this is all the guidance from the 12Z for the morning update they had to use, and look how tightly packed all the models are on that. They're very strong signal in the synoptic features that develop the steering current, and as expected, the models are all basically the same. Even on timing, they're very close as to what we're looking at there. Okay, on to the forecast out of NHC at 10 o'clock. Again, it's basically an update of the forecast you've been seeing for at least 24 hours now, with the storm forecast to reach Category 3 intensity at the rate it's going right now with those flights, maybe even earlier than this, but certainly by tomorrow morning, and then starting a downward trend just 12 hours or so prior to landfall, and hopefully considerably more than what's forecast, but I wouldn't bet on it at this stage of the game. Hurricane warnings were extended westward to High Island, and tropical storm warnings continue down the coast to past San Luis Pass, and then further east throughout southeast Louisiana. As far as when's the adverse conditions going to start on the Gulf Coast, the timing chart of the earliest reasonable time, it shows that overnight tonight into the early mornings Friday on the immediate coast, and spreading inland during the day on Friday for tropical storm conditions. And then by midday or so, we'll start getting the approach of the hurricane conditions on the Louisiana coast. Some of the key issues, of course, in Louisiana, it's always a storm surge problem when you have a storm of even tropical storm, high-end tropical storm on up. There's places that are going to have severe impacts from storm surge. The forecasts moved a little farther west because of the track now locking in pretty close to just east of Cameron for a landfall point, bringing the 7 to 11 foot range from the Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge all the way to Port Fourchon. So this whole area from that area, especially the Vermilion Bay into like the Morgan City, New Iberia area, anything that's close to these levels of elevation are going to get flooded from the storm surge. And the lesser impacts, but flooding nonetheless, go all the way to the Alabama-Florida border on the east side of the storm, and to High Island for significant, perhaps some significant flooding, and then lesser flooding all the way down to Port O'Connor as between the waves and some tide run up and the very low roads that we have in that area. Storm surge warning that's out for the area goes from, again, from High Island to as far as Biloxi off to the east. And this shows just how far inland this water can penetrate because the elevations are so low. It's all south of I-10 on the current forecast track, but it's still a lot of land area that's at risk from storm surge flooding from our storm. Rainfall with a fairly fast movement of the storm, being compensated somewhat from the fairly large size of it, and the fact they'll be getting rainfall well into past the landfall of the center in there. A pretty large area of 6 to 10 inches, and some isolated 12 to 15 inches are possible in there. Fairly typical for a storm moving at this speed and size as it makes landfall. I think I had one more thing I wanted to show you guys. There we go. The Lake Charles, if you look at the Weather Service's homepage map and then go up to click on the Lake Charles area, you'll see the plethora of warnings already in effect for the whole area there. And there's some of the same areas, Cameron, Calcasieu Parish, that were hit so hard by Laura. We were talking before we went on the air of seeing all the pictures yesterday in a flyover of a drone of so many houses with the blue tarp on. It's only been 6 weeks. That's not nearly enough time to get the significant repairs done on your property that suffered wind damage in so large a scale as what happened in Lake Charles. And one of the things that means is that even though Delta is forecast to be a significantly less intense hurricane coming in there, with the weakened structures and blue tarp roofs, even the lesser sense of a storm like this will cause further damage to the property that's in place there. It looks like on this track, there's a pretty good chance that a lot of Lake Charles would be in the western eye wall of this hurricane as it makes landfall. And I forgot to mention, we were on the recon there, and their vortex reports, we now have about a 35-mile diameter eye. So unlike yesterday when we had that very tiny, or 2 days ago, a very tiny eye, now we have a much larger structure as far as the eye, which means the eye wall and the affected conditions will be at a much wider area. One other note on Lake Charles, obviously, as you could recall with Laura, the hurricane took out the radar there. That's not something you can go down to Walmart and buy one off the shelf and fix. So it'll still be several months before we have a radar back in play there. The surrounding radars from the Houston area, from New Orleans, Baton Rouge area, and Fort Polk will give some coverage, but down in here, the Lafayette area in particular, it'll be outside of Doppler range, so we won't have velocity data if that's where the eye goes, as it goes inland. I think that's what I had. I'll turn it back over to you guys. I see Hal there.
Yeah, Hal's here. Bill, real quick before we get to Hal, we did got a question online from Kimberly. She wants to know if it's possible for the storm to get wider, not whiter, but wider.
There's several reasons. In general, a northward, a storm that's gaining latitude grows in size. And I could pull out the meteorology book and we could slap some equations up there, but just take my word for it. That's one of the things that is noticed on that. A second thing, that broad cyclonic flow that was surrounding the Gulf of Mexico is conducive to expanding the wind field area of the storm as it moves northward into that zone.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Good job, Bill. Thank you. We appreciate that update. And Hal has joined us now. So Hal Needham and Bill will have a discussion here. Hal, where are you? I see you're driving, but where are you driving?
I'm not far from Winnie, Texas. Hey, everybody. Bill, great update. It helped me a lot, actually, as I'm just hearing you with the updated, accurate information. I'm near Winnie, Texas, and I'm going to be heading over towards the impact zone to set up a community flood monitoring system.
Okay. Where do you think you'll put the monitors in?
Really, a lot of some scattered places throughout South Central Louisiana. I'm trying to go to places that don't have a NOAA tide gauge to try to fill in the gaps. And so we're trying to partner with anyone around Vermilion Bay, Sycamore Point, all the way over towards like Homa, Cocodrie, those types of areas that don't have a tide gauge. And what we do is we actually put these monitoring systems on people's homes as long as they have an elevation certificate. And so that can tie it into the local elevations, and we can get an idea of what's going on during the storm and kind of fill in some of those data gaps.
Oh, cool. There's it shows on the map of a little community called Pecan Island on the coast there. I don't know if there's anyone there because they may have sustained damage during Laura, just not have been able to get back yet.
Yeah, anywhere in there. I'm going to be kind of going along South Louisiana from west to east today, but anywhere, especially if anyone is in a very elevated, sturdy structure, maybe somewhat inland, that it will be staying. We also have a remote system we're trying to make work that we can take GoPro snapshots and have it send through the cellular network. So we're doing what we can to help monitor this, but obviously, like you said, Bill, the extent of land that can be flooded in South Louisiana is tremendous in these storms, even if it's not as large and as strong as Laura was.
Yeah, it might take a pointer from Mark Sudduth. He looks for, he had some of the bridges over the bayous on the north-south running roads moving in from the coast. They have pretty good elevation in the Louisiana Department of Transportation that you could calibrate it to. They may be good sites for it.
Yeah, thank you, and they're very sturdy too. So that's a really good perspective. Thank you. I think he and his team. I think he and his team were going to be down in Vermilion Bay as well. So I may cross paths with them today as well. They do great work in installing cameras and surveillance.
Yeah, get him to take a drone video of you installing one of your gauges.
I've been loving this drone. The drone videos have been amazing, and like you said, just seeing all the blue tarps, it gets you thinking about the impact. Even if these winds are less than Laura's was, you know, what happens when you get 90 or 100 mile an hour sustained winds hitting a blue tarp? You know, that is a big concern. Obviously, even with lesser winds than Laura, we could see really extensive damage.
Yeah, the only other example I can think of that was 2004 when Francis and Jean made landfall within a few miles of each other in Florida in the same season, that there was some places that hadn't been repaired yet from the previous damage.
So that was really right in there between Palm Beach and Jupiter, right?
Yes.
It was, yeah, you're right. It was back to back in the same season. Unfortunate to see. So we'll hope for a speedy recovery as much as possible.
Yeah, and Francis wasn't at the same level of intensity wind-wise as Laura was, so the damage was notably less than what you got from Laura.
Bill, do you recall offhand that Francis and Jean, were the intensities similar to each other, or do you recall the information on those two storms?
I think they were Cat 3s at landfall, but I'm not totally sure of that.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, obviously, like you said, they really struck the same area in the same season.
Yeah. Now, did you look at the storm surge forecast from your angle, and how did it compare with what we have officially out there now?
You know, I think it matched up really well. I mean, what I was seeing in the National Hurricane Center latest update, it seemed to match what I would expect from a data-driven perspective and looking at the history of storms in that area for more than 100 years. It seems to match up pretty well. Something that, one question I've been getting a lot of, people have been asking about places like Galveston Bay. Galveston Bay actually got a higher storm surge than the Gulf side during beta because the center of circulation passed south of the bay. But with these storms that track to the east of Galveston Bolivar, typically we see the higher salt water on the Gulf side because we don't really have anything to really force it into the bay as much. So a lot of people have been asking about that for the Houston Galveston Bolivar Metro.
Yeah, just from anecdotally, but from watching storms for about 25 years there, when they're coming up from the Gulf, the initial easterly component to the wind and the wave run up and tide increase, that'll be reflected back in the bays, and then rather suddenly, as the storm heads further north and the winds become more north down the bay, you start pushing it the other way, and I think you may get a pileup on the north-facing coastline of the Bolivar and Galveston Island for a brief period while that happens.
It's possible when you get that north wind in the bay that it can pile up there, and that actually puts some water into downtown Galveston. We've seen water in the streets of Galveston during Beta and Laura, and I think we'll see it again down around the Strand and some of those places downtown. So,
yeah, that's why you have to step up about 4 feet from the street to get on the sidewalk. When they built that part, they were wise.
That's right. They elevated it up. So I'll be doing my best to just document what I'm seeing, and you know what, I try to provide like a no hype, just this is what I see on the ground type of thing. So we'll see, but I hope the best for these people. It's really hard to see the same area get hit twice in the same year. So I'll be active and in touch with y'all about what I'm seeing and what's happening on the ground.
If you get a chance and you take some pictures of your setups, if you'll send them to me, I'll post them up there and get you some advertising for that to help in the future.
I appreciate that. We started this community flood monitoring system during Tropical Storm Beta, and I could not believe how popular it was. I had more than 10 people with elevation certificates say, hey, I would love to be a citizen scientist. So we went over to their house. We always have 2 flood meters. One of them shows how high the water level is above ground, or if they have a dock above the bulkhead. and then the other is calibrated to a datum we call NAVD88, the North American Vertical Datum of 1988, and that's the same system for most people's elevation certificates. So the beauty of that, if we know the water gets to 5 feet above the NAVD88 datum, well, people might have evacuated, or they might have a vacation home on the coast, and they can know more or less if their home flooded from a distance because their elevation certificate's in the same system, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we can do some inundation mapping pretty quickly then as well to get a ballpark picture of what flooded and how deep the water was.
Yeah. I've been pretty astounded here in Galveston County how lax they are about requiring elevation data in your surveys. I don't have any elevation data on the house I'm living in now.
Yeah, it is interesting, and a lot of people do not know their elevation. And the other thing, generally when I travel along the coast in Texas and other states, people just assume the elevation is above mean sea level.
Right.
And so it's actually above this datum. So the water level, for example, in Galveston this week has been running up to about 2.5 feet every evening at high tide. So, you know, if your house is at 8 feet, you think you're 8 feet above sea level, you're actually 2.5 feet below that. And so a lot of times people are closer to the water than they realize is kind of the take home there.
Yeah. When you do training to people that have never been exposed to that, you get all hung up on the the datums, the various datums that people use. I kind of
I've been trying
kind of like the approach they're using now on the tides and currents thing of gauging it off of absolute high tide, maximum high tide. That people tend to understand that means they're flooding somewhere if it's getting above that.
Yeah, that I do like that for just as far as like people, you know, knowing that the normally dry ground is flooding, so that's helpful. The issue, though, I've been noticing more and more is that a lot of people don't know how high their building is above high tide. So they don't know, am I 3 feet above high tide? Am I 8 feet above high tide? So I've been seeing at the end of the day, people don't even care what component of this is surge, what component is tide, what component is sea level rise. They just want to know, is it going to flood at my house? And if so, when is it going to flood and how deep, you know? It often comes back to their property, you know, can I expect water in my garage, you know?
Yeah. So I'm at 28 feet. Do you assume I'm safe?
Let me run the numbers here. I'm thinking, yeah.
Except for when the next asteroid splashes in off the Yucatan.
Yeah, that's a good point, you know, and it's 2020, so that could be possible. How often are you guys going to do broadcasts through the storm?
Anytime we find a good need to do one. So if you're someplace and have some great information for us, we'll do it. We're doing it today as a special report. Nothing planned for tomorrow, but we could if we've got some good information coming in, because it'll be around landfall time, a little before landfall probably.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll keep in touch with you guys and let you know what I'm seeing from the field. I know, strangely enough, South Louisiana has some of these salt domes that are these strange natural features that are a little bit higher. So there are places you can get not that far from the Gulf and actually be elevated. I may be in one of those places to document this. So I'll keep in touch and let you know what I'm seeing there on the field.
The snakes and the alligators will join you.
It'll be quiet.
Thanks, Al. We appreciate it. We appreciate you being with us today. And we do have one question that probably for Bill, but by all means, Hal, jump in on this as well. This is from Haskell. We know Haskell. Do we think the general westward bias of the models are also in play this time, or do we even want to hazard a guess?
I think there was some of that in the early runs, where they actually showed it closer to the Sabine Pass area on some of the model runs, but if there is, it's not much, I don't think, at this stage of the game.
Too late for that now. Yeah. So Hal, looks like you're driving. I hope you're driving very carefully, even though you're talking to us the whole time. We appreciate that.
Could I ask one last question for Bill or anyone else?
Yes.
Do you have an average size for, I know I'm putting you on the spot here and we can look it up, but I've been really wanting to learn more about hurricane size. Is there an average size for the radius of hurricane force winds or tropical storm force winds, or have those climatologies been developed? And if so, do you know what the average size would be?
I don't know offhand, but they have been. Mainly for the storm surge, before what we're doing now with storm surge at NHC, after Charlie, they came up with a technique for adding or subtracting depending on the size. So they had this is an average storm, this is a large storm, and this is a small storm. I forgot what the numbers are. The knowledge of the radius is fairly recent. There wasn't much data on that in the early years of the science, so it's kind of spotty.
Okay, I was curious. I do think there's a source, Demuth et al. I think it's 1988 to present. They do have the wind radii. And it's fascinating to see how these storms vary, you know?
Yeah, go look at Umberto if you want to see small.
We do have a question here on this side from Eugene Phillips wanting to know what the impact for northern Louisiana could be.
Well, if it's still moving pretty fast, the winds will be strong enough, I think, to cause some tree down and power outages. Though with the degree of shear and dry air that's coming into it, they're forecasting probably a more rapid than average decay of the storm at landfall.
Hal, we've got something coming in from Casper here. He wants to know if you can share the link to the flood community. They'd be happy to share it on their weather page. So folks throughout Louisiana could find what you're looking for.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll definitely share those links, and it's great to see people get connected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you get back online where you're sitting down in front of a computer somewhere. So great. Anything else, Bill or Hal, before you wrap up today? We appreciate the information. This has been really good.
Nope. Yeah. If you're into doing prayers, do it for the Southwest Louisiana folks. The stress level of folks that have just gone through what they did with Laura has got to be humongous right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hal, any thoughts before we let you go?
No, the compounding impact. I mean, I've never been through back-to-back hits, but I remember when I moved to Baton Rouge to go to grad school, Hurricane Gustav knocked off our power for 10 days, and we had tremendous amount of damage in the neighborhood. And then 12 days later, here comes Hurricane Ike. So it just creates this level of stress. You know, you finally got your power back, and now all of a sudden securing property again. Can you go out and buy groceries again, or are you going to have another week without power? It's just human nature, I think, can take one disaster and you want to push through and recover. But then when a second one comes, I think it really gives you a deeper sense of hopelessness. Like, is this ever going to end? You know, so really thoughts and prayers to the folks here in Southwest Louisiana.
I think we saw a lot of that in 2004 in Florida when they got hit. Just the state got hit over and over and over again. And folks were just, at wit's end, people going as far away as they could just to get out of the state for the rest of the hurricane season. Hal, thank you.
Absolutely. Bill,
as always, thank you. We appreciate it. Great information, and let us know how things are going, Hal. We look forward to hearing from you again as this storm comes in. I want to thank everybody who's part of the program. As always, I want to thank our sponsors, Plylocks, Hurricane Clips, USAA, and of course the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau. South Padre is open for business. But boy, I tell you what, there's not a whole lot of beach right now as the storm goes by just to the east of South Padre. They've got some significant coastal flooding happening again for the 5th or 6th time this hurricane season. So thanks to all of our sponsors who make this a possibility. A lot of other great programs coming up in the not too distant future. Let's throw it back to Alex. Alex?
All right, thank you very much. And again, one last look there at our sponsors. They are keeping us going, and we'll be back with more special reports as we are able to do so. Otherwise, be sure and join us next week at 10 a.m. on Wednesday for our next program.